the early morning hours of September 17, 1994, long-haul trucker Martin Owens was making his regular run across Nevada's stretch of Interstate 50, often called the loneliest road in America. The 41-year-old veteran driver had been hauling freight between Salt Lake City and Sacramento for nearly 20 years, preferring the solitude of night drives when traffic was sparse and the desert temperatures more forgiving. The events of that night would become one of the most puzzling and disturbing incidents in American trucking history. Owens had checked in with his dispatcher at 1:15 a.m. from a rest stop near Ely, Nevada. His rig, a blue Peterbilt, pulling a refrigerated trailer loaded with agricultural products, was running smoothly. He reported being on schedule for his 8:00 a.m. delivery in Sacramento, about 400 miles away. The weather was clear, with a nearly full moon illuminating the vast, empty desert landscape. At approximately 2:30 a.m., another trucker, Dale Howell, was heading eastbound when he passed Owens, going the opposite direction near the Desatoya Mountains. The two had known each other casually for years, recognizing each other's trucks and exchanging the customary flash of headlights. Howell would later recall that everything seemed normal when they passed. It was what happened next that would haunt Nevada Highway Patrol and multiple law enforcement agencies for decades. At 3:07 a.m., Owens's truck was captured on the only traffic camera along that stretch of highway, approximately 45 miles west of where Howell had seen him. The footage showed the Peterbilt moving at a normal speed, its lights functioning properly. This was the last confirmed sighting of Martin Owens. At 3:43 a.m., a series of distressed radio calls came through on the emergency channel. Truckers monitoring CB radio channel 19 reported hearing Owens's voice, clearly agitated. According to multiple witnesses, Owens claimed he was being followed by a vehicle with unusually bright headlights that had been tailgating him for nearly 20 minutes. "They're riding my bumper. Can't see anything but those damn lights," Owens reportedly said. "Whoever you are, back off." Several truckers advised him to pull over at the next rest area, about 12 miles ahead. Owens acknowledged and said he would do exactly that. 3 minutes later, Owens made another transmission, his voice now panicked. "They're trying to run me off the road. Oh God, they're coming alongside me now." The transmission abruptly cut off. Two truckers who were about 30 miles behind Owens reported seeing distant headlights that appeared to swerve violently off the road, followed by what they thought might be a flash of light from the distance. By the time they reached the area, approximately 15 minutes later, they found no trace of Owens's truck. When Owens failed to arrive at his destination or check in with his company, a massive search was launched. Highway patrol officers retraced his route but found no skid marks, no evidence of an accident, no debris, nothing to indicate where a 70,000-pound tractor trailer might have gone. The search expanded to include helicopters and search parties combing the harsh desert terrain on both sides of the highway for miles. 2 days later, investigators discovered tire tracks leading off the highway into a rarely used maintenance road. The tracks continued for approximately 7 miles before mysteriously ending in a wide, flat area of the desert. But there was no truck, no trailer, no cargo, no Martin Owens. The investigation intensified. Law enforcement considered every possibility: hijacking, theft, an elaborate insurance scam, even Owens faking his own disappearance. But Owens had no financial troubles, no criminal history, and by all accounts, was happily married with 3 children and a new grandchild he adored. 3 weeks after his disappearance, Owens's wallet was found by a hiker approximately 30 miles north of where the truck tracks had ended. It contained his driver's license, credit cards, and $236 in cash, ruling out robbery as a motive. The case took an even more disturbing turn 2 months later, when a Nevada Department of Transportation road crew discovered Owens's CB radio, damaged but recognizable, in a dry creek bed nearly 15 miles from the highway. Forensic analysis found several fingerprints that couldn't be matched to any database. Other truckers came forward with their own strange experiences on that same stretch of I-50. Several reported being aggressively followed by vehicles with unusually bright headlights in the weeks before and after Owens's disappearance. One driver described being forced onto the shoulder by an unmarked white van that sped away when another vehicle approached. Another claimed to have seen a similar van parked at various rest stops along I-50, always at night, always with its lights off. In January 1995, a breakthrough seemed imminent when police in Reno arrested 3 men in connection with a series of cargo thefts from trucks. During interrogation, one suspect allegedly mentioned the trucker job that went bad out on 50. When investigators pressed for details, the suspect immediately requested a lawyer and refused to speak further. Before any charges related to Owens's disappearance could be filed, the suspect was found dead in his cell, an apparent suicide by hanging. The investigation stalled. Years passed. Owens's case became required study for Nevada state troopers and the subject of numerous true crime documentaries and podcasts. In 2006, a partial VIN plate believed to be from Owens's truck was discovered by a backcountry hiker in an abandoned mining site approximately 35 miles north of where he vanished. The remote location, accessible only by unimproved dirt roads, raised more questions than it answered. How could a vehicle that size have been transported there without being seen? Why would anyone go to such elaborate lengths to hide a truck and its driver? The most chilling development came in 2012, when a retired truck stop waitress from eastern Nevada came forward with a Polaroid photograph she claimed had been left at her diner by a strange, quiet man just days after Owens disappeared. The grainy image showed what appeared to be a blue Peterbilt, similar to Owens's truck, parked inside a large structure that resembled a hangar or warehouse. While the image was too blurry to confirm the truck's identity conclusively, forensic photography experts noted that the license plate area seemed to have been deliberately obscured. Martin Owens's family has never given up hope of finding answers. His wife passed away in 2017, having spent the last years of her life advocating for greater safety measures for long-haul truckers, including mandatory GPS tracking and emergency alert systems. The Nevada State Police still maintain an active file on the case. Each year, on the anniversary of his disappearance, fellow truckers hold a memorial convoy along I-50, driving in silent procession past the point where Owens was last known to be. What makes this case so disturbing isn't just the disappearance itself, but the complete absence of physical evidence. How does an entire tractor-trailer and its driver vanish without a trace from one of America's major highways? Who was following Martin Owens that night, and why? Were the bright headlights that he reported in his final transmission connected to the organized cargo theft ring, or something else entirely? For truckers who still drive the loneliest road in America at night, Martin Owens's disappearance serves as a grim reminder of the vulnerability that comes with isolation. Many refuse to drive that stretch after midnight, and those who do often travel in informal convoys for safety. The case remains officially unsolved. Some investigators believe Owens was the victim of a sophisticated cargo theft operation that went tragically wrong. Others suspect he may have witnessed something he wasn't meant to see while driving through the remote desert landscape, perhaps illegal activity taking place just off the highway, and was silenced as a result. Whatever the truth, The disappearance of Martin Owens continues to cast a long shadow over America's trucking community. A real-life nightmare that unfolds not in the realms of the supernatural, but in the dark reality of an empty highway, where the only witnesses are the stars above and the vast, silent desert that keeps its secrets well. The first victim disappeared on a rainy Tuesday in October 1998. Thomas Malone, a 38-year-old trucker from Bakersfield, California, was making his regular haul from Los Angeles to Salt Lake City when he pulled into the Cactus Creek rest area along Highway 91 in southern Utah. His truck, a distinctive red Kenworth with custom chrome details, was captured on the rest area's security camera at 11:37 p.m. By morning, the truck remained in the same spot, driver's door slightly ajar, engine cold. Thomas Malone was nowhere to be found. Inside the cab, investigators found Malone's logbook with meticulous entries, his overnight bag still packed, and a half-finished cup of coffee. His wallet lay open on the passenger seat with $174 in cash, untouched. There were no signs of struggle, no blood, no evidence of foul play. It was as if Malone had simply stepped out of his truck and vanished into the thin desert air. What made the disappearance particularly baffling was Malone's reputation for reliability. In 15 years of long-haul driving, he had never missed a delivery deadline. His dispatcher described him as clockwork reliable and noted that he always called if he was running even 10 minutes behind schedule. That night, Malone's scheduled check-in call never came. The local sheriff's department conducted an extensive search of the area, bringing in dogs and volunteers to comb the rocky landscape surrounding the rest area. Nothing was found. Not a footprint, not a scrap of clothing, not a single clue to Malone's whereabouts. The case might have remained an isolated mystery, if not for what happened 6 weeks later. On December 9, 1998, Darlene Wilcox, one of the few female long-haul drivers working the western routes at that time, pulled into the same Cactus Creek rest area around midnight. Like Malone, the 42-year-old Wilcox was an experienced driver with an impeccable safety record. Unlike Malone, Wilcox was known to be exceptionally cautious. Friends described her as hyper-vigilant about her personal safety on the road. Wilcox had developed a habit of calling her sister when stopping for the night, describing her exact location and stating when she planned to depart in the morning. That night, she called at 12:08 a.m., telling her sister she would grab a quick 4 hours of sleep before continuing on at dawn. She mentioned noticing only one other vehicle in the rest area, a dark-colored sedan parked at the far end of the lot, its interior light on. By 6:30 a.m., when Wilcox hadn't called to check in as promised, her sister contacted the trucking company, who in turn notified Utah Highway Patrol. A trooper arrived at Cactus Creek by 7:15 a.m. Like Malone's truck before it, Wilcox's blue Peterbilt was exactly where she had parked it. Her logbook showed a final entry at 12:15 a.m. Her purse was in the locked compartment where she always kept it. The bunk showed signs that someone had lain on it, but the blankets weren't disturbed enough to suggest she had actually slept there. The most disturbing detail came from the rest area's security footage. At 2:17 a.m., the camera captured a figure approaching Wilcox's truck. The grainy black and white video showed what appeared to be a man of average height, wearing dark clothing and some kind of cap or hat. He walked with purpose directly to her truck and knocked on the driver's side door. After a moment, the door opened and there was a brief conversation. Then, inexplicably, Wilcox climbed down from the cab and walked off camera with the unidentified visitor. Neither returned within the 3-hour recording window. The dark sedan Wilcox had mentioned to her sister was gone by morning. with no record of its license plate or make and model beyond Wilcox's vague description. Two experienced truckers vanishing from the same remote rest area within weeks of each other triggered a multi-agency investigation. The FBI joined local law enforcement in what was now being treated as a potential serial abduction case. Warnings went out across trucking channels. For months, drivers avoided Cactus Creek, many refusing to stop anywhere along that 60-mile stretch of Highway 91. The case took an unexpected turn in March 1999 when a Nevada Department of Transportation road crew, clearing debris after a flash flood approximately 30 miles southwest of Cactus Creek, discovered a weathered leather wallet wedged between rocks in a dry wash. Inside was Thomas Malone's driver's license. The discovery prompted a renewed search of the area, which yielded more evidence. A woman's work boot matching the type Darlene Wilcox was known to wear, and most chillingly, a small notebook with a list of truck driver names, including both Malone and Wilcox. 3 other names on the list had been crossed out. Investigators scrambled to identify and locate these individuals. The first 2 names, Jordan Hayes and Miguel Sanchez, were quickly connected to missing persons reports from 1997, both truckers who had disappeared while traveling through the Southwest. Their cases hadn't been linked previously because they vanished from different locations. Hayes from a truck stop in Arizona, and Sanchez from a rest area in New Mexico. The third crossed-out name belonged to Franklin Weber, a 52-year-old driver who wasn't in any missing persons database. When contacted, Weber's trucking company revealed something unnerving. He wasn't missing at all. Weber was very much alive, having narrowly escaped what he described as an attempted abduction at Cactus Creek Rest Area in July 1997. Weber hadn't reported the incident to police, believing he would sound paranoid. According to his belated statement, he had been approached in the middle of the night by a man claiming to be a stranded motorist. Something about the man's demeanor had made Weber uneasy, and he had refused to open his door. The stranger had become increasingly agitated, eventually threatening to add him to the collection before disappearing when another truck pulled into the rest area. Weber's description of the man matched the figure seen in the security footage with Darlene Wilcox, average height, wearing dark clothing and a cap. He added one crucial detail the grainy video hadn't revealed. The man had spoken with what Weber described as an educated accent, using surprisingly formal language. The investigation intensified, with law enforcement setting up undercover operations at Cactus Creek and other isolated rest areas along Highway 91. For months, nothing happened. It was as if the predator had sensed the trap. Then came the most disturbing development yet. In January 2000, a recreational hiker exploring an abandoned mine shaft in the mountains about 15 miles from Cactus Creek made a grisly discovery: human remains. Forensic analysis would eventually confirm they belonged to Thomas Malone. The condition of the remains told a horrifying story. Malone had not died quickly. Evidence suggested he had been kept alive for weeks after his abduction, subjected to what the medical examiner delicately termed systematic trauma. The cause of death was ultimately starvation. As investigators expanded their search to nearby abandoned mines, of which there were dozens in the area, many dating back to the 1800s, they discovered a series of crude cells fashioned from mining chambers. One contained personal items belonging to Darlene Wilcox. Another held a trucker's cap identified as belonging to Miguel Sanchez. In the deepest chamber, they found something that chilled even the most seasoned investigators: a makeshift trophy room containing logbooks, keys, and personal effects from all 4 victims. The walls were covered with photos, surveillance-style images showing truckers at various rest stops, many unidentified. Some photos showed the victims before their abductions, suggesting they had been stalked for some time. Most disturbing was a detailed journal describing the abductions and subsequent captivity in clinical, almost academic language. The writer, presumably the perpetrator, referred to the victims not by name, but by number, detailing their responses to isolation and threshold for privation, as if conducting experiments. Despite the wealth of evidence, the identity of the perpetrator remained elusive. The journal contained no personal details, the photos included none of the photographer, and forensic evidence was degraded by time and the harsh environment. The Highway 91 investigation stalled again for nearly 2 years, until a routine traffic stop in Cedar City, Utah, led to the arrest of Edward Crane, a 45-year-old former psychology professor. In Crane's vehicle, officers found multiple fake IDs, a police scanner, and detailed maps marking remote rest areas across the Southwest. A search of Crane's modest home revealed the smoking gun, a hidden room containing photographs matching those found in the mine shaft, a collection of items taken from victims not yet connected to the case, and journals continuing the clinical observations found in the mine. When confronted with the evidence, Crane showed neither remorse nor concern. They were perfect subjects, he reportedly told investigators. Isolated, self-sufficient, accustomed to discomfort. I wanted to see how long they would maintain hope in a hopeless situation. Crane had lost his university position in 1996 following complaints about his ethically questionable research proposals involving isolation and human psychological breaking points. After his academic career collapsed, he had apparently decided to conduct his research outside institutional constraints. His method was simple but effective. He targeted truckers at isolated rest stops, approaching them with various plausible stories, a broken-down vehicle, an urgent medical situation, or sometimes posing as a fellow trucker. Once he gained their trust and physical proximity, he would use a concealed stun gun to incapacitate them before transporting them to his network of makeshift cells in abandoned mines. In April 2002, Edward Crane was convicted of 4 counts of kidnapping and murder, receiving multiple life sentences without the possibility of parole. Authorities believe the 4 confirmed victims may represent only a fraction of his actual crimes, as many long-haul truckers who disappear are not immediately reported missing due to the independent nature of their work. Today, a small memorial stands at Cactus Creek Rest Area, dedicated to Malone, Wilcox, Hayes, Sanchez, and others unknown who vanished along the highway. The case has led to increased security measures at remote rest areas throughout the western United States, including better lighting, more comprehensive camera systems, and panic buttons. For truckers who still travel Highway 91 through the stark beauty of southern Utah, the memorial serves as a grim reminder of the vulnerability that comes with their profession. Many still refuse to stop at Cactus Creek after dark, referring to it simply as Dead Man's Curve, a nickname that has nothing to do with the road itself and everything to do with the predator who once hunted there. The Highway 91 abductions fundamentally changed how the trucking industry approaches driver safety, particularly for those driving overnight routes through isolated areas. But perhaps the most unsettling aspect of the case is how easily Crane exploited the culture of mutual aid that exists among long-haul truckers, their willingness to help a stranded motorist or fellow driver, turning their best instincts into a fatal vulnerability. On the evening of March 12, 2005, veteran trucker Ray Simmons pulled his 18-wheeler into the Blue Mountain Truck Plaza off Route 219 in rural Pennsylvania. After 14 hours on the road, the 47-year-old was looking forward to a hot meal and a few hours of sleep before continuing his haul of machine parts to Buffalo. What Ray didn't know was that he was being watched, had been watched for the past 100 miles, by someone who had singled him out for reasons that would only become clear in the aftermath of what happened next. The Blue Mountain Plaza was nothing special. A fuel station, a greasy spoon diner, and a small shower facility that catered to the steady stream of long-haul drivers traversing the Appalachian corridor. Ray's routine that night was the same one he'd followed for 23 years on the road. Fuel up, grab dinner, check in with dispatch, sleep. At 9:42 p.m., surveillance footage captured Ray leaving the diner, carrying a styrofoam container of leftover meatloaf. He returned to his truck, a white Freightliner with faded blue lettering, parked at the far end of the lot, where the big rigs lined up in parallel rows. The camera lost sight of him as he walked between two trucks. Ray Simmons was never seen alive again. The first sign that something was wrong came the next morning when Ray failed to check in with his dispatcher. Catherine Morris had worked with Ray for over a decade and described him as military precise about his schedule. When his GPS tracker showed his truck hadn't moved from the Blue Mountain Plaza for over 12 hours, she knew something was wrong. Local police conducted a preliminary search of the area. They found Ray's truck locked, his logbook open on the dash, with his last entry, noting his arrival time. His overnight bag was still in the sleeper compartment, but there was no sign of the driver. Most telling was the discovery of his dinner leftovers on the passenger seat, the food untouched. Whatever had happened, it had occurred before Ray had even entered his truck. What initially seemed like a possible medical emergency or walkaway case took a dark turn 3 days later. A Pennsylvania Department of Transportation worker picking up trash along Route 219 approximately 7 miles north of the truck plaza discovered Ray's wallet in a ditch. The cash and credit cards were still inside, but something had been added. A Polaroid photograph showing Ray, clearly unconscious, his hands bound with what appeared to be zip ties. The FBI joined the investigation, bringing in a team specializing in interstate crimes against transportation workers. As they reviewed security footage from the truck plaza, agents noticed something that local investigators had missed: a dark SUV that had entered the plaza shortly after Ray's arrival. The vehicle had circled the lot twice before parking near the edge of the camera's range. No one had exited the SUV on camera, and it had left approximately 40 minutes after Ray was last seen. The investigation might have stalled there, if not for what happened 13 days after Ray's disappearance. Trucker Elaine Corbett, 39, pulled into the same Blue Mountain Plaza around 10:30 p.m. Like Ray, she was an experienced driver with a perfect safety record. Unlike Ray, Corbett had developed a habit of photographing her truck at every stop, a practice she'd started after a minor hit-and-run incident years earlier. That night, while taking her usual pictures, Corbett noticed something unusual. Later, she would tell investigators, "I was snapping photos of my rig when I caught a flash of movement underneath the trailer parked next to mine. At first, I thought it was an animal, maybe a stray dog. But then I realized it was a person, crawling on their belly between the wheels." Corbett immediately retreated to her truck, locked the doors, and called 911. By the time police arrived 17 minutes later, the lurker was gone. However, Corbett's photographs provided the first clear image of the suspect, a man in his 30s or 40s, wearing dark clothing and what appeared to be tactical-style gloves. Most unsettling was the object clearly visible in his hand, a telescoping rod with what looked like a wire loop at the end, similar to animal control catch poles used to snare aggressive dogs. Police issued an alert to all truck stops within a 100-mile radius. For weeks, patrol cars maintained a visible presence at the Blue Mountain Plaza and similar facilities along Route 219. The FBI released a composite sketch based on Corbett's photographs, which generated dozens of tips, but no solid leads. Then, in early May 2005, nearly 2 months after Ray Simmons vanished, a breakthrough came from an unexpected source. State police responded to a single vehicle accident on a rural road about 30 miles from the Blue Mountain Plaza. The driver, identified as Howard Keegan, 42, had lost control on a curve and crashed into a tree. When officers searched the vehicle, they found a disturbing collection of items: zip ties identical to those seen in the Polaroid of Ray, a telescoping catch pole, several syringes containing traces of a powerful sedative, and most damning of all, Ray Simmons' company ID badge. Inside a locked toolbox in the trunk, investigators discovered more Polaroids, dozens of them, showing not just Ray Simmons, but 5 other men, all appearing unconscious or semi-conscious in similar poses. One of the photographs revealed a partial interior that forensics experts would later identify as a specific type of utility van. A search of property records led police to an abandoned dairy farm owned by Keegan's deceased uncle. There, in a converted milk house with reinforced doors and blacked-out windows, they found the horrifying answer to what had happened to Ray Simmons and, presumably, the other men in the photographs. The concrete-floored room contained a metal-framed bed bolted to the floor, with restraint points at each corner. A drain had been installed in the center of the room. Forensic teams recovered hair and blood samples from multiple individuals, including Ray. On a workbench, investigators discovered notebooks filled with detailed surveillance notes on dozens of truckers, including their routes, schedules, and habits. Howard Keegan survived the crash, but suffered serious head trauma. When he regained consciousness in the hospital, under police guard, he was unable or unwilling to speak. Neurologists confirmed he had suffered damage to areas of his brain associated with speech and memory. Whether genuine or feigned, Keegan's silence meant that many questions about his crimes would remain unanswered. What investigators pieced together from evidence painted a methodical predator who had developed a system for hunting long-haul truckers. Keegan would identify potential victims at truck stops, follow them to determine their habits, then lie in wait. Using the catch pole, a tool that allowed him to maintain distance, he would deliver an incapacitating injection of sedatives, then transfer his unconscious victims to his van. The most chilling aspect of the case emerged when investigators gained access to Keegan's home computer. For years, he had frequented online forums dedicated to true crime and serial killers, particularly those who had targeted travelers and highway users. In private messages, he had expressed admiration for their methods while criticizing their mistakes that led to their eventual capture. Keegan had been employed intermittently as a long-haul trucker himself between 1998 and 2003, but had lost his commercial license after a series of safety violations. Records showed he had worked briefly at the Blue Mountain Plaza as an overnight janitor before being fired for erratic behavior. This history gave him intimate knowledge of trucker routines and the relative isolation of certain areas of large truck stops, particularly at night. As the investigation expanded, law enforcement connected Keegan to at least 3 other disappearances of truck drivers across Pennsylvania and neighboring states. In each case, the pattern was similar: experienced drivers vanishing from truck stops with their personal belongings left behind. The fate of Ray Simmons was finally determined when cadaver dogs led searchers to a remote section of the dairy farm property. There, in a stand of dense pines, they found human remains buried in shallow graves. DNA testing would eventually confirm the presence of Ray and 4 other victims. The Keegan case sent shockwaves through the trucking industry, highlighting vulnerabilities that many drivers had long worried about, but rarely discussed openly. truck stops across the country implemented new security measures, including better lighting, expanded camera coverage focused on truck parking areas, and in some locations, regular security patrols. For many long-haul truckers, the case confirmed their worst fears about the dangers that lurk in the blind spots of America's highways. The solitude that many drivers cherish became something more ominous, isolation that could make them targets. Female truckers like Elaine Corbett, whose quick thinking and photography habit had helped break the case, reported feeling especially vulnerable. In response, trucking companies developed new protocols, including regular check-in requirements and panic buttons in newer trucks. Many drivers began traveling in loose convoys, maintaining radio contact with colleagues even during rest periods. The buddy system, once mainly used by rookies, became standard practice for veterans as well. Howard Keegan never stood trial for his crimes. In October 2006, while awaiting competency evaluation at a secure medical facility, he used a sharpened plastic utensil to open an artery in his arm. He left no suicide note, taking whatever twisted motivations had driven him to his grave. The Ray Simmons Memorial Fund was established by his former employer to help improve safety conditions for long-haul drivers. Every year on the anniversary of his disappearance, truckers passing the Blue Mountain Plaza sound their horns in a solemn tribute that echoes across the Appalachian foothills. Today, a simple stone marker stands in the truckers' lounge at the plaza, bearing the names of the confirmed victims and a quote chosen by Ray's widow. "The road is long, but they are not forgotten." For veteran drivers who still traverse Route 219 through the rolling Pennsylvania countryside, the Blue Mountain Plaza serves as a grim reminder of the vulnerability that comes with life on the road. Many still refuse to park in the far section of the lot, referring to it as the blind spot, a term that has nothing to do with mirror visibility and everything to do with the predator who once hunted there, selecting his victims from the shadows between the trucks. The case of the Route 219 stalker fundamentally changed how the trucking industry approaches driver safety, particularly during overnight rest periods. But perhaps most unsettling is how effectively Keegan exploited the truckers' world, using their necessary routines and isolation against them, turning the essential rest stop into a hunting ground. Law enforcement agencies now include truck stops in regular patrol routes, and FBI training includes specific modules on crimes targeting transportation workers. But for those who drive the long, lonely stretches of America's highways, the legacy of Howard Keegan is a constant reminder that sometimes the greatest danger isn't the road ahead, but what or who might be watching from the blind spot. In the pre-dawn darkness of November 18, 2008, Victor Reese navigated his 18-wheeler along the winding roads of Montana's Bitterroot Range. The 53-year-old trucker from Spokane was hauling industrial refrigeration equipment to Missoula, taking a lesser-used mountain route, Highway 472, to avoid construction delays on the main interstate. As an early winter storm began dumping heavy snow across the region, Reese checked in with his dispatcher at 4:17 a.m., reporting that conditions were deteriorating, but still manageable. "Visibility's down to about 50 yards, he said over the crackling CB radio. "But I've got chains on, and I'm making decent time. Should clear Deadfall Canyon before the worst hits." It was the last communication anyone would have with Victor Reese for the next 72 hours, hours that would become the focus of one of the most disturbing and baffling incidents in American trucking history. When Reese failed to arrive at his scheduled delivery in Missoula by noon, his employer, Northwestern Logistics, began standard protocols for a delayed driver. They attempted to reach him by radio and cell phone, neither of which received a response. The truck's onboard GPS tracking system showed it had stopped moving at approximately 5:30 a.m. in a remote section of Highway 472 that cuts through Deadfall Canyon, a steep walled ravine notorious among local drivers for poor cell reception and treacherous winter conditions. By 3:00 p.m., with no word from Reese and the GPS showing no movement for over 9 hours, Northwestern Logistics contacted the Montana Highway Patrol. Given the severe weather conditions, authorities suspected Reese had either pulled over to wait out the storm or possibly slid off the road. A patrol unit was dispatched, but had difficulty reaching the location due to rapidly accumulating snow. By nightfall, with conditions deemed too dangerous for continued search efforts, the operation was suspended until morning. The following day, as the storm cleared, search and rescue teams accessed Highway 472 from both ends. At 11:23 a.m., they located Reese's truck, a white Kenworth T680 with Northwestern Logistics markings, parked in a small turnout approximately halfway through Deadfall Canyon. The engine was off, the doors were locked, and there was no sign of the driver. What investigators found inside the truck would only deepen the mystery. Reese's logbook was open on the dash, with his last entry noting poor visibility and his decision to wait out the worst of it. His wallet, containing $237 in cash and all his credit cards, was in the center console. His insulated jacket was still hanging on the back of the driver's seat. Most puzzling was his cell phone, plugged into the charger with several missed calls from his employer and family. There were no signs of struggle or foul play inside the cab. The only unusual element was a half-eaten breakfast sandwich and a thermos of coffee that had spilled across the passenger seat, suggesting Reese may have left the vehicle in haste. Outside, investigators found boot prints in the snow leading from the driver's side door toward the edge of the turnout, where they abruptly disappeared at the guardrail overlooking a steep wooded slope. Despite an extensive search of the canyon below, including the use of cadaver dogs, no trace of Victor Reese was found. As news of the disappearance spread through the tight-knit trucking community, an unexpected development brought investigators a potential lead. Janet Howell, a 45-year-old trucker from Idaho, contacted authorities after seeing a news report about Reese. Howell had been driving the same route in the opposite direction during the storm and had stopped at the same turnout around 5:00 a.m. to secure a shifting load. "I was struggling with the straps in the snow when headlights came around the bend," Howell later told investigators. "It was a relief to see another vehicle. That road gets lonely, especially in bad weather. The truck pulled into the turnout behind me, and I figured it was another driver waiting out the storm." Howell described finishing her work and climbing back into her cab. As she prepared to pull out, she noticed something that struck her as odd. A smaller vehicle, possibly an SUV, had pulled in behind the second truck. Through the swirling snow and darkness, she could make out what appeared to be a flashing light on its roof. "I assumed it was road maintenance or maybe a highway patrol car," she said. "I didn't think much of it at the time. The weather was getting worse by the minute, and I was focused on getting through the canyon before it became impassable." What Howell observed was potentially the last documented sighting of Victor Reese and his truck. The timeline matched the GPS data, showing when Reese's vehicle had stopped moving, but her account raised troubling questions. No official vehicles, highway patrol, maintenance, or emergency services had been dispatched to that area until later that afternoon. If the vehicle with the flashing light wasn't an official responder, who was it? The investigation took an even more disturbing turn 3 days after Reese's disappearance. A Montana Fish and Wildlife officer patrolling a remote access road approximately 12 miles from Deadfall Canyon discovered an abandoned SUV partially hidden among trees. The black Ford Explorer had been wiped clean of fingerprints, its license plates removed. Inside, forensic technicians found something chilling: a dashboard-mounted light bar of the type used by unmarked law enforcement vehicles, along with a police band radio scanner. Most damning was what they found in the rear cargo area: zip ties, duct tape, a stun gun, and traces of blood that would later be matched to Victor Reese through DNA analysis. The discovery transformed a missing person case into a suspected abduction. But the question remained: who would target a truck driver in the middle of a snowstorm on a remote mountain highway, and why? The breakthrough came from an unlikely source. 2 weeks after Reese's disappearance, authorities in Wyoming arrested a man for impersonating a police officer after he attempted to pull over an off-duty sheriff's deputy. The suspect, 37-year-old Leland Gaines, was driving a white SUV equipped with concealed emergency lights. A search of Gaines's apartment in Cheyenne revealed a disturbing collection: police scanners, multiple light bars and sirens, replica badges from various law enforcement agencies, and a collection of trucker CB radios. Most significant was Gaines's laptop, which contained a folder labeled Routes, with detailed information on remote highways across 5 states, including notes on cell coverage dead zones and typical patrol schedules. Another folder, labeled Drivers, contained surveillance photos of multiple truck drivers, including Victor Reese, along with information about their regular routes and schedules. As investigators dug into Gaines's background, a troubling picture emerged. The former security guard had applied to multiple police departments over the years, but had been rejected each time during psychological evaluation stages. He had accumulated an extensive collection of police memorabilia and spent hours listening to scanner traffic. Neighbors described him as obsessed with law enforcement and noted that he often wore tactical clothing and drove vehicles that resembled unmarked police cars. When confronted with evidence linking him to the Deadfall Canyon incident, Gaines initially denied any involvement. However, facing mounting forensic evidence, including cell tower data placing him in the area on the morning of Reese's disappearance, he eventually confessed to a pattern of crimes targeting isolated truckers. According to Gaines's confession, he had developed a methodology for identifying vulnerable drivers on remote routes. Using police scanners and CB radio, he would listen for truckers reporting their positions during bad weather or mechanical troubles. Posing as law enforcement, he would approach the stranded drivers, gain their trust, and then overpower them. They always opened the door, he told investigators in a recorded interview. When someone thinks you're a cop, they don't question it. They're programmed to comply. In Reese's case, Gaines admitted to monitoring CB chatter during the snowstorm and hearing Reese's call to his dispatcher about the deteriorating conditions. Recognizing an opportunity, he followed Reese's truck through Deadfall Canyon, waiting until the driver pulled over to wait out the storm. Using emergency lights and wearing what appeared to be an official uniform, Gaines approached the truck, claiming to be checking on stranded motorists. When Reese opened his door, Gaines incapacitated him with a stun gun before forcing him into the SUV. The presence of Janet Howell's truck in the turnout had been an unexpected complication, but Gaines had maintained his law enforcement persona, even nodding acknowledgement to her as she pulled away, a chilling detail Howell would later confirm. What happened next remains one of the most disturbing aspects of the case. Gaines took Reese to an abandoned hunting cabin deep in the Bitterroot Wilderness, a location so remote it was only accessible by four-wheel drive vehicles in good weather. There, according to forensic evidence later collected from the site, he held Reese captive for approximately 38 hours before the trucker attempted to escape during a moment when Gaines was outside checking his vehicle. Weakened by exposure and injuries from the stun gun, Reese made it less than a mile before collapsing in the snow. His remains were eventually recovered based on information provided by Gaines as part of a plea agreement, ending the agonizing uncertainty for his family, if not their grief. As the investigation expanded, authorities linked Gaines to 3 other cases of missing truckers across Montana, Wyoming, and Idaho, dating back to 2006. In each instance, the pattern was similar. Drivers disappeared from remote locations during bad weather, their trucks found abandoned but intact, with few clues to their fate. In July 2009, Leland Gaines pleaded guilty to 4 counts of kidnapping and murder, receiving multiple life sentences without the possibility of parole. During sentencing, the judge described his crimes as predatory in the most calculating sense, noting the extraordinary measures Gaines had taken to target victims who were isolated and vulnerable. The Deadfall Canyon incident and subsequent investigation fundamentally changed security protocols within the trucking industry. Companies implemented enhanced GPS tracking systems that could detect unusual stops and trigger automatic alerts. Many carriers began requiring check-in calls when drivers stopped in remote areas, regardless of weather or time of day. Some outfitted their fleets with dashboard cameras that activated when someone approached the truck. Perhaps most significantly, the case prompted a nationwide advisory to commercial drivers about verifying the identity of anyone claiming to be law enforcement, particularly in isolated areas. The Trust but Verify protocol, calling dispatch to confirm the legitimacy of an officer before opening doors, has become standard practice among long-haul truckers. For those who still drive the mountain routes of the Northern Rockies, particularly Highway 472 through Deadfall Canyon, Victor Reese's story serves as a somber reminder of the unique vulnerabilities faced by those who keep America's supply chains moving through the most isolated corners of the country. A small memorial plaque now stands at the turnout where Reese was last seen, bearing his name and the names of Gaines's other victims. Truckers passing through often stop briefly to leave small tokens, coins, keychains, or truck miniatures, a gesture of solidarity with a fellow driver who never made it home. The legacy of the Deadfall Canyon incident lives on in the changed practices of an entire industry and in the heightened awareness among truckers that sometimes the greatest dangers on America's highways have nothing to do with road conditions or mechanical failures, but with the predators who understand and exploit the solitary nature of their profession. As veteran trucker Janet Howell, whose chance encounter placed her unwittingly at the edge of a nightmare, would later observe, "We're the most visible invisible people in America. Everyone sees our trucks, but few people think about the vulnerable human being inside that cab, often alone, often in the middle of nowhere, just trying to do their job." On the moonless night of July 8, 2011, 36-year-old trucker Darren Wilkins pulled his rig into the Ocotillo Rest Area along Interstate 10, about 80 miles east of Tucson, Arizona. After 11 hours hauling refrigerated produce from California to Texas, Wilkins needed a mandatory break before continuing his journey. The experienced driver had traveled this route dozens of times, and like many truckers, had his preferred stopping points, places he considered safe and quiet. The Ocotillo Rest Area, with its expansive lot, allowing trucks to park well away from the noise of the highway, had always been one of his favorites. What Wilkins couldn't have known was that this routine stop would place him at the center of one of the most disturbing serial murder cases in recent American history. At 6:17 a.m. the next morning, Wilkins failed to check in with his dispatcher, missing his scheduled departure time. When repeated calls to his cell phone went unanswered, his employer contacted Arizona Highway Patrol, requesting a welfare check at Wilkins's last known location. Trooper Miguel Sanchez arrived at the Ocotillo Rest Area at 7:45 a.m. He found Wilkins's truck, a blue Peterbilt with refrigeration unit, parked in the far corner of the lot, engine off, doors locked. Through the window, Sanchez could see Wilkins slumped in the driver's seat. Initial assumptions of a medical emergency quickly gave way to a more sinister reality when Sanchez broke the window to gain entry. Darren Wilkins had been strangled with a thin wire garrote. The medical examiner would later determine that death had occurred between 2 o'clock and 3 o'clock a.m. His wallet remained in his back pocket, containing $156 in cash. His logbook showed a final entry at 11:42 p.m., noting his arrival and planned departure time. Nothing appeared to be missing from the truck. The most unsettling detail was what responding officers found clutched in Wilkins's right hand: a small plastic whistle, yellow in color, of the type commonly sold in children's toy stores. It hadn't belonged to Wilkins, according to his family. It appeared to have been deliberately placed in his hand after death. The case might have remained an isolated tragedy, if not for what happened 3 weeks later at the Lordsburg Rest Area, 150 miles east, along the same stretch of I-10 in New Mexico. On July 29, 2011, another trucker, 42-year-old Elena Vasquez, was found murdered in the sleeper berth of her truck under eerily similar circumstances. Like Wilkins, Vasquez had been garroted with a thin wire. Like Wilkins, nothing had been stolen. And like Wilkins, a small plastic whistle, this one blue, had been placed in her hand. The similarities were impossible to ignore. Law enforcement agencies in Arizona and New Mexico formed a joint task force, bringing in FBI support to investigate what they now suspected was the work of a serial killer targeting long-haul truckers. As detectives combed through months of incident reports from rest areas along I-10, they discovered something chilling. Wilkins and Vasquez weren't the first victims. 7 months earlier, in December 2010, 51-year-old Peter Krause had been found dead in his truck at a rest stop just west of El Paso, Texas. His death had initially been attributed to a heart attack, but the autopsy had noted unusual bruising around his neck that hadn't been fully explained. When investigators re-examined Krause's case file, they found a detail that had been noted but not given significance. A small green whistle had been found on the floor of the cab, near the body, assumed to have fallen from Krause's pocket. His family, when interviewed, confirmed that Krause had not owned such an item. The task force now had 3 linked cases spanning 3 states along the same interstate corridor. Media outlets dubbed the unknown killer the Whistler, and trucking companies began issuing warnings to drivers about traveling alone along I-10, particularly at night. Forensic analysis yielded frustratingly little. The wire garrotes appeared to be standard picture-hanging wire, available at any hardware store. The whistles were mass-produced toys, sold in dollar stores across the country. No fingerprints, DNA, or other traceable evidence had been left behind. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Following a news conference about the murders, a truck stop employee in Las Cruces, New Mexico, contacted authorities with information that would fundamentally change the investigation. Melissa Torres, a night shift cashier at the Roadrunner Truck Plaza, reported that in the weeks before Vasquez's murder, she had observed a peculiar interaction. A man driving a white panel van with Arizona plates had approached several truckers in the parking lot, offering to sell them security devices for their rigs, supposedly small alarms that would trigger if anyone tried to break into the cab while they slept. He seemed to specifically target drivers who were alone, Torres told investigators. He'd watch the lot from his van, then approach them as they were heading back to their trucks for the night. Torres had found the man suspicious enough that she'd written down his license plate number and kept it in her wallet. That number led authorities to Raymond Mercer, a 47-year-old former security system installer living in Tucson. When detectives ran Mercer's name through law enforcement databases, they discovered a history of minor offenses, mostly petty theft, and one charge of impersonating a security guard that had been dropped when the complainant failed to appear in court. More significantly, they found that Mercer had been fired from his job at a home security company 3 years earlier, after customers complained about his increasingly erratic behavior and inappropriate comments about their personal safety. Surveillance was established on Mercer's residence, a small house on the outskirts of Tucson, where he lived alone. Detectives observed him making regular trips along I-10, stopping at rest areas and truck stops, apparently watching the comings and goings of vehicles. On August 18, 2011, they observed him approach a female trucker at the Picacho Peak rest area, carrying what appeared to be a small electronic device. After a brief conversation, the trucker declined whatever he was offering and returned to her vehicle. That night, investigators followed Mercer back to the same rest area around 1:00 a.m. When they observed him attempting to gain entry to an occupied truck while wearing gloves, they moved in for an arrest. In Mercer's van, they found a disturbing collection of items: picture-hanging wire cut into 3-foot lengths, a bag containing several dozen plastic whistles in various colors, and a notebook with detailed observations about truck stops and rest areas along I-10, including notes on which ones had security cameras and how frequently they were patrolled. Most damning was a crude map marking the locations of the 3 known murders, each annotated with a date and a small colored dot corresponding to the color of the whistle left at each scene. The arrest of Raymond Mercer led to one of the most disturbing revelations in the case. During interrogation, Mercer initially denied any involvement in the murders, but when confronted with the evidence from his van, he began to share details that only the killer could have known, including the exact manner in which the garrotes had been applied and the precise placement of the whistles in the victim's hands. What emerged was a twisted methodology. Mercer had developed an approach that exploited the natural caution of long-haul truckers while simultaneously using their isolation against them. Posing as a security consultant selling anti-theft devices, he would gain truckers' trust and attention. The small electronic device he showed them was actually just a modified car alarm, remote, with no real function. Most of them turned me down, he told investigators, but some were interested. All I needed was for them to open the door. Once invited into a truck's cab to demonstrate his security system, Mercer would use the opportunity to strike, employing the garrote with practiced efficiency. The whistles, he explained with a disturbing lack of emotion, were his signature, a twisted reference to the idea that no one would hear them whistle for help. Forensic analysis of Mercer's home computer revealed something even more chilling: a document titled Rest Stop Protocol, outlining his selection criteria for victims. He specifically targeted drivers who were alone and chose rest areas known for low traffic during overnight hours. He avoided truck stops with 24-hour services, preferring isolated highway rest areas where trucks might be widely spaced apart. Most disturbing was his methodology for selecting which truck to approach. He would circle rest areas using a handheld scanner to detect CB radio transmissions from inside trucks. When he identified a driver communicating with other truckers, he would move on. He specifically sought out drivers who appeared to be completely alone, with no communication with others, those least likely to be immediately missed. As the investigation expanded, authorities linked Mercer to 5 additional unsolved deaths of truckers across the Southwest, dating back to 2009. In each case, the deaths had been attributed to other causes: heart attacks, strokes, or unknown medical conditions, as the garrote marks had been subtle enough to be missed by first responders, focused on more obvious explanations for a trucker found dead in their cab. In March 2012, Raymond Mercer pleaded guilty to 8 counts of first-degree murder to avoid the death penalty. He was sentenced to multiple life terms without the possibility of parole. When asked by the judge if he wished to make a statement, Mercer's only response was, "They never heard me coming." The case of the Whistler sent shockwaves through the trucking industry. Companies implemented new safety protocols, including buddy systems for drivers on long hauls and enhanced security features in newer trucks. Many drivers began traveling in loose convoys, maintaining radio contact with colleagues, even during rest periods. Some truck stops installed panic buttons in parking areas and increased security patrols during overnight hours. The American Trucking Association launched a campaign called Never Alone, providing resources for drivers to connect with each other along routes and creating a system where drivers could check in with dispatchers before opening their doors to strangers, regardless of the reason. For the families of the victims, the resolution of the case brought closure, but little comfort. During Mercer's sentencing, Darren Wilkins's widow addressed the court. "My husband spent 20 years on the road, always careful, always vigilant. He loved the freedom of the open highway. This monster didn't just take his life. He took that sense of freedom from an entire community of drivers who keep this country running." Today, a small memorial stands at the Ocotillo rest area where Darren Wilkins spent his final hours. Truckers passing through often sound their horns in tribute, a gesture that has become known among drivers as the Wilkins Warning, a reminder to remain vigilant even in the most familiar places. The I-10 corridor from California to Texas remains one of the busiest freight routes in America. At night, the rest areas still fill with trucks as drivers take their mandatory breaks. But in the years since the arrest of Raymond Mercer, something has changed. Drivers cluster their rigs closer together. Lights remain on in cabs that once would have gone dark. And on the CB radio, a new sign-off has become common among truckers heading to rest. Keep your doors locked and your whistles ready. The case of the I-10 rest stop murders fundamentally altered how an entire industry thinks about personal safety. For the hundreds of thousands of men and women who make their living on America's highways, the legacy of the Whistler is a heightened awareness that sometimes the greatest dangers aren't found on the road itself, but in the seemingly safe places where they stop along the way. As veteran trucker and safety advocate Eleanor Martinez puts it, "Before Mercer, we worried about accidents, weather, mechanical failures. Now we know there's a different kind of hazard out there. People who see our solitude as vulnerability. The open road will never feel quite the same again." On the evening of February 3, 2013, Michael Kaufman's 18-wheeler crested a gentle rise on Highway 37, just north of Harbor Springs, Michigan. The 44-year-old veteran driver was hauling automotive parts from Detroit to a manufacturing plant in the Upper Peninsula, a route he'd traveled at least twice monthly for the past decade. What happened in the next 15 minutes would become one of the most harrowing survival stories in American trucking history and expose a terrifying truth that would change highway safety protocols across the northern United States. The night was clear but bitterly cold, with temperatures hovering around -15 degrees Fahrenheit. Kaufman's logbook, recovered later, showed he'd made good time despite the harsh winter conditions, keeping a steady pace of just under the speed limit. At 9:47 p.m., he radioed a routine check-in to his dispatcher, reporting all systems normal and estimating his arrival at his destination by 2:00 a.m. The Harbor Springs Bridge, spanning a deep ravine about 70 feet above the frozen Pine River, was a familiar landmark for Kaufman. A concrete and steel structure built in the 1970s, and recently inspected, according to state records. As he approached the bridge at approximately 9:52 p.m., his dash camera captured what appeared to be perfectly clear roads. What the camera couldn't detect was the nearly invisible sheet of black ice that had formed across the bridge's surface, the result of a unique and deadly combination of factors that engineers would later determine had created the perfect conditions for disaster. The first indication of trouble came when Kaufman's truck began to slide ever so slightly to the right. The dash camera's audio picked up his quick intake of breath, followed by the sound of him shifting gears to reduce speed, a veteran driver's instinctive response. For 3 seconds, it appeared he had controlled the slide. Then the trailer began to jackknife. The next 20 seconds of footage show Kaufman fighting to regain control as the massive vehicle slid sideways across both lanes. His training evident, he turned into the skid while avoiding sudden braking that would have accelerated the jackknife. For a moment, it seemed he might regain control. That hope vanished when the trailer struck the bridge's right guardrail at an angle. The impact, while not catastrophic, was enough to compromise the already weakened section of railing, a critical detail that would become central to the subsequent investigation. What should have been a standard guardrail impact turned into something far more deadly when a 10-foot section of the railing collapsed outward. The trailer's momentum carried it toward the newly created gap, dragging the cab with it. The dash camera captured Kaufman's single, shouted expletive before the feed abruptly cut off as the truck tore through the opening and plummeted toward the frozen river below. By all rational expectations, Michael Kaufman should have died that night. The truck's cab struck the ice-covered river with catastrophic force, partially breaking through the surface before coming to rest at a precarious angle. The trailer, still connected, hung partially suspended from the broken bridge, creating a grotesque sculpture of twisted metal, visible to the first responders who arrived approximately 17 minutes later, alerted by a passing motorist who had witnessed the accident. What those first responders found was something none of them had anticipated. Kaufman was alive. Thrown from the cab during impact, but somehow avoiding being crushed, Kaufman had landed on the frozen river surface about 20 feet from the partially submerged truck. Though severely injured with multiple fractures and showing signs of hypothermia, he was conscious when paramedics reached him. His first words, according to the incident report, were, "Something's wrong with that bridge. The rail just went." The rescue operation that followed was complicated by the extreme cold, the precarious position of the suspended trailer, and the risk of the ice giving way completely. Using specialized equipment, emergency teams stabilized Kaufman and transported him to Harbor Springs Regional Medical Center, where he underwent emergency surgery for internal bleeding and compound fractures to both legs. While Kaufman fought for his life in intensive care, investigators began the process of determining what had caused this near-fatal accident. Initial assumptions focused on driver error or possible mechanical failure, standard protocols for any trucking incident. However, as evidence accumulated, a more disturbing picture emerged. Michigan Department of Transportation engineers, examining the failed guardrail, discovered that the section that had given way showed signs of extensive internal corrosion that would not have been visible during routine external inspections. More troubling, they found that the guardrail's anchoring system had been compromised by improper maintenance during a repair 5 years earlier. But the investigation took an even more unsettling turn when authorities reviewed the past decade of accident reports for the Harbor Springs Bridge. They discovered a pattern: 6 previous accidents involving the bridge's guardrails, all during winter months, all dismissed as routine winter driving incidents with no fatalities. In each case, the damage had been repaired without comprehensive structural assessment. Michigan State Police expanded their investigation, interviewing former highway maintenance workers and contractors. What they uncovered would eventually lead to criminal charges and a complete overhaul of the state's bridge inspection protocols. Jacob Merritt, a former supervisor for the Regional Highway Maintenance Division, admitted under questioning that he had been aware of structural deficiencies in the Harbor Springs Bridge for at least 3 years prior to Kaufman's accident. According to court records, Merritt had documented his concerns in multiple reports to his superiors, specifically highlighting the corroded guardrail anchoring systems. Those reports, investigators discovered, had been repeatedly shelved due to budget constraints, with temporary cosmetic repairs authorized instead of the complete structural overhaul Merritt had recommended. More disturbingly, official inspection reports had been altered to downgrade the severity of the identified issues, changing Merritt's urgent structural concerns to routine maintenance needs. When confronted with these discrepancies, Merritt's former superior, Regional Director Leonard Walsh, initially denied knowledge of any cover-up. However, email records later revealed Walsh had explicitly directed his staff to manage the paperwork to avoid triggering mandatory repairs that would exceed his department's annual budget. Find a way to make this a next fiscal year problem, one email instructed. The criminal investigation expanded to include multiple officials from the Department of Transportation, eventually resulting in charges ranging from official misconduct to reckless endangerment for 7 individuals. Walsh would ultimately serve 14 months in prison for his role in the cover-up. But the human cost of this negligence was most evident in the painful recovery of Michael Kaufman. After 17 surgeries and months of physical therapy, he would never walk normally again. The traumatic brain injury he sustained left him with persistent cognitive issues that ended his trucking career. His lawsuit against the state of Michigan and the transportation officials was eventually settled for $4.7 million, a fraction of the lifetime care costs he would face. They knew, Kaufman told reporters from his wheelchair during the trial of the transportation officials. They knew that Bridge was a death trap waiting to happen, and they did nothing. How many more are out there? That's what keeps me up at night. His question proved prescient. In the aftermath of the Harbor Springs incident, Michigan launched a comprehensive review of all similar bridges throughout the state. Of the 372 structures with comparable designs and age profiles, 47 were immediately flagged for urgent repairs due to similar guardrail anchor corrosion issues. 9 were closed entirely pending complete rebuilding. The investigation expanded to neighboring states with similar climate conditions. Within 2 years, more than 300 bridges across the upper Midwest were identified as having potentially fatal flaws that had been masked by cosmetic repairs or documentation manipulation. The American Society of Civil Engineers would later refer to this systematic failure as the most widespread infrastructure fraud scheme uncovered in modern American history. For the trucking community, the Harbor Springs incident became a watershed moment. The American Trucking Association partnered with whistleblower organizations to create an anonymous reporting system for drivers to document potentially dangerous infrastructure conditions observed during their routes. Within the first year, the system received over 12,000 reports, resulting in the emergency closure of 28 structures nationwide. The psychological impact on truckers who regularly traversed northern routes was profound. Many drivers began refusing assignments that involved crossing older bridges during winter conditions. Some trucking companies implemented their own bridge rating systems, prohibiting their drivers from using structures they deemed high risk, regardless of official classifications. Perhaps the most lasting legacy of the Harbor Springs incident was the creation of the Infrastructure Transparency Act, federal legislation requiring all states to maintain publicly accessible databases of bridge inspection records, repair histories, and maintenance budgets. The law, often referred to as Kaufman's Rule, eliminated the bureaucratic black boxes that had allowed dangerous conditions to persist unaddressed. For Kaufman himself, no legislation could undo the damage. Though he received one of the largest personal injury settlements in Michigan history, no amount of money could restore his health or his career. In the years following the accident, he became an outspoken advocate for infrastructure safety, testifying before Congress and appearing at transportation safety conferences, despite his ongoing health struggles. Every truck driver knows there are risks that come with the job, Kaufman said during congressional testimony. Weather, long hours, other drivers making bad decisions. We accept those risks. What we can't accept is driving across bridges that transportation officials know are dangerous. That's not a risk, that's a betrayal. Today, a small memorial plaque stands at the approach to the rebuilt Harbor Springs Bridge, which was completely reconstructed with modern safety features in 2015. The plaque bears no dramatic language, simply stating, "Drive with caution. Remember February 3rd, 2013. For truckers familiar with the story, no further explanation is necessary. The Harbor Springs incident fundamentally changed how America approaches infrastructure maintenance, particularly in regions subject to extreme weather conditions. The case study is now required reading for civil engineering students across the country, with the dash camera footage used in training programs to illustrate how quickly disaster can strike when infrastructure fails. For those who drive America's highways for a living, particularly through the harsh northern winters, the lessons of Harbor Springs have become part of the profession's collective consciousness. Drivers approaching bridges in winter conditions often still radio a simple message to those behind them: watch for black ice, remember Kaufman. The true horror of the Harbor Springs Bridge incident lies not in the dramatic plunge of a truck from a collapsing guardrail, but in the cold calculation of officials who repeatedly chose budget considerations over human lives, and in the unsettling question that lingers for every driver on America's aging highways: how many other betrayals of public trust remain undiscovered, waiting for the next heavy vehicle, the next patch of black ice, the next Michael Kaufman, who might not be lucky enough to survive? On August 17, 2018, Teresa Blackwell pulled her 18-wheeler onto Interstate 5 just north of Redding, California. The 39-year-old trucker from Eugene, Oregon, was hauling medical supplies to Sacramento, a route she'd driven dozens of times in her 15-year career. What began as a routine summer haul would soon transform into one of the most harrowing survival stories in modern American trucking history. The summer of 2018 had been particularly brutal for California wildfires. Drought conditions, combined with record-breaking temperatures, had created a tinderbox throughout much of the state. By mid-August, firefighters were battling 17 active fires, stretching emergency resources to their breaking point. The largest, the Mendocino Complex Fire, had already consumed over 350,000 acres, but media attention had largely focused on the more populated areas under threat. Less widely reported was the Cedar Creek Fire, which had been smoldering in the mountains west of I-5, near the Oregon-California border. Initially categorized as a moderate threat, burning in remote forest land, it had been assigned limited resources as firefighters prioritized blazes threatening more densely populated areas. That assessment changed dramatically on the morning of August 17th, when unexpected wind shifts drove the Cedar Creek Fire toward the interstate with shocking speed. By noon, the fire had grown from 8,000 acres to over 25,000, outpacing the ability of fire authorities to issue timely warnings to travelers along I-5. Blackwell's truck was one of approximately 60 vehicles, including 7 other commercial trucks, that found themselves caught in a 20-mile stretch of highway that would soon become a corridor of fire. The first indication of trouble came when she noticed an unusual haze developing to the west, dulling the typically crisp summer skyline of the Shasta Trinity National Forest. "Something's not right with that smoke pattern," she commented to another trucker over the CB radio. The response would later prove tragically prophetic. "Winds shifting. If that's coming our way, we're in trouble." By 1:30 p.m., the situation deteriorated rapidly. Blackwell's dashcam, recovered later, captured the alarming transformation of the environment around her truck. In less than 20 minutes, visibility dropped from clear conditions to less than a quarter mile as smoke engulfed the highway. Embers began raining down on the road, carried by winds that had intensified to nearly 50 mph. At 1:47 p.m., Blackwell's dashcam recorded her slowing the truck as brake lights appeared ahead. Traffic had completely stopped. Through her windshield, she could see California Highway Patrol officers frantically directing vehicles to pull to the shoulders. One officer, barely visible through the thickening smoke, was shouting instructions through a bullhorn. "They're saying the fire jumped the ridge," a panicked voice reported over the CB. "It's coming straight for the highway." The recording captures Blackwell's response, her voice steady despite the escalating danger. "Everyone stay calm. We've got concrete under us and clearing on both sides of the road. If we stay in our vehicles, we should be okay." Her assessment, while logical, failed to account for the extraordinary intensity of the approaching firestorm. By 2:00 p.m., the main front of the Cedar Creek fire reached the highway embankment. Winds gusting over 60 mph pushed the flames upslope with explosive force, creating a phenomenon fire scientists call a flame tsunami, a massive wall of fire moving faster than a person can run. Blackwell's dashcam recorded the moment of impact as the fire front struck the line of stranded vehicles. In seconds, visibility dropped to near zero as superheated smoke enveloped the highway. Through the darkness, flashes of intense orange illuminated trees exploding into flames along both sides of the road. The temperature inside Blackwell's cab, according to her truck's environmental sensors, spiked from 92 degrees to over 120 within minutes. What followed was 45 minutes of sustained terror that survivors would later struggle to describe. With nowhere to go and no way to drive out of the inferno, the stranded travelers could only hunker down in their vehicles and hope the fire front would pass before the intense heat became lethal. For Blackwell, whose training included emergency protocols for various road hazards, the situation demanded immediate action. Her truck's dashcam and the recovered audio from her cab recorder documented her methodical response to the escalating crisis. First, she used her truck's built-in radio to broadcast clear instructions to nearby truckers. Shut down engines. Fire will consume oxygen and could suffocate engines. Save batteries for emergency measures. Close all vents. Use water to dampen any cloth you can find and cover your face. Then she took inventory of her own resources: 2 gallons of drinking water, an emergency breathing mask from her hazmat kit, and the relative protection of her well-insulated cab. She dampened towels and sealed them around the edges of her doors and windows, creating makeshift filters against the toxic smoke seeping into the cabin. Through gaps in the smoke, Blackwell could see other travelers who were less prepared. A family in a minivan directly ahead of her appeared to be panicking, with children pressed against the windows. Using her truck's horn to get their attention, she held up written instructions on a piece of cardboard. Stay in vehicle, wet clothes, cover faces. The most harrowing moment, captured clearly on the dash cam, came at approximately 2:23 p.m. A massive Douglas fir, its trunk already compromised by fire, crashed across the highway less than 50 feet ahead of Blackwell's truck. The tree struck a passenger car, crushing its roof. Without hesitation, Blackwell grabbed her emergency kit and left the relative safety of her cab. The external camera on her truck recorded her fighting through intense heat and near zero visibility to reach the damaged vehicle. Finding the driver's side crushed, she circled to the passenger door, which she managed to wrench open after several attempts. From inside, she pulled an unconscious man, later identified as retired schoolteacher Martin Delaney, 68, across the center console and out of the wreckage. Half dragging, half carrying Delaney, Blackwell returned to her truck. The entire rescue took less than 2 minutes, but the external camera shows how the extreme conditions immediately affected her. Her exposed skin reddened visibly from the intense heat, and she stumbled twice from the combined effects of smoke inhalation and poor visibility. Back in her cab with the injured Delaney, Blackwell radioed her situation to any emergency responders who might be monitoring the frequency. "I've got an injured civilian, male, approximately 70, unconscious but breathing. Significant head laceration. Vehicle crushed by fallen tree at mile marker 752. Immediate medical evacuation needed." The response came not from emergency services, but from another trucker a quarter-mile ahead. "No way in or out right now. Fires across the entire road about a mile north. We're completely cut off." For the next 30 minutes, Blackwell administered basic first aid to Delaney, monitored his breathing, and continued broadcasting their position, all while the firestorm raged around them. The cab temperature continued to rise, reaching nearly 140 degrees, despite all her efforts to insulate against the heat. Dashcam footage shows her regularly pouring small amounts of water over both herself and the still unconscious Delaney to prevent heat stroke. At approximately 3:10 p.m., the main fire front began to pass, having consumed most of the available fuel in the immediate vicinity. Visibility improved slightly, revealing the full extent of the devastation. Trees continued to burn on both sides of the highway, but the massive wall of flame had moved east, leaving behind a smoldering, apocalyptic landscape. As conditions marginally improved, Blackwell spotted the flashing lights of emergency vehicles approaching from the south. Firefighters and paramedics who had battled through the aftermath of the fire front to reach the stranded motorists. Her final recorded words before emergency responders reached her truck captured both relief and lingering concern. "They're coming. Hang on, sir. Help is almost here." The full scope of the Cedar Pass fire entrapment, as it came to be known, only became clear in the following days. Of the 60-plus vehicles trapped in the fire corridor, 58 people emerged alive, many suffering from smoke inhalation and heat exposure, but remarkably, with no life-threatening injuries. 3 people died: an elderly couple who had attempted to flee their vehicle on foot, and the driver of a convertible with its top down, who suffered fatal burns before the fire front had even fully reached the highway. Martin Delaney, the man Blackwell had pulled from the crushed car, spent 2 weeks in intensive care with a fractured skull and third-degree burns on his arms. He would later credit Blackwell's quick action with saving his life, telling reporters, "I remember the tree coming down, and then nothing until I woke up in the hospital. The doctors told me I had minutes before smoke inhalation would have killed me if I'd stayed in that car." For Teresa Blackwell, the ordeal left both physical and psychological scars. She suffered second-degree burns on her face, neck, and arms from her rescue effort, requiring skin grafts and months of recovery. The psychological impact proved equally challenging. PTSD manifested in recurring nightmares and panic attacks triggered by the smell of smoke or the sound of strong wind. Yet the experience also transformed her into an unexpected advocate for improved emergency protocols on America's highways. In the months following the Cedar Pass incident, she worked with the American Trucking Association to develop new training modules specifically addressing wildfire encounters. Her dashcam footage, which she donated to the National Fire Protection Association, became a cornerstone of educational materials used to train both professional drivers and emergency responders. The Cedar Pass fire entrapment led to significant policy changes for California's transportation and forestry departments. Investigators determined that the rapid advance of the fire toward the highway could have been anticipated hours earlier, but jurisdictional confusion between agencies had delayed both the monitoring of the fire's progression and the issuance of highway closure orders. In response, California implemented a new integrated alert system linking fire behavior modeling directly to transportation management centers, allowing for earlier highway closures when fire behavior suggests potential risk to travel corridors. The system has since been adopted by 5 other Western states prone to wildfires. For the trucking industry, the Cedar Pass incident highlighted both the unique vulnerabilities and crucial capabilities of commercial drivers during natural disasters. Commercial trucks with their reinforced cabs, elevated visibility, and robust communication systems proved to be among the safest vehicles during the fire entrapment. In the aftermath, several motor carriers enhanced their trucks' emergency equipment to include fire-specific items like personal air filtration masks and thermal blankets. Teresa Blackwell eventually returned to trucking 9 months after the incident, though she requested routes that kept her away from high fire risk areas. When asked by an interviewer why she chose to go back to the profession despite her traumatic experience, her response was straightforward. "The road is still where I belong, but now I drive with a deeper understanding of what it means to be responsible for not just my cargo, but potentially for the lives of everyone around me on that highway." Today, a small memorial stands at the Cedar Pass viewpoint along Interstate 5, commemorating those who lost their lives and recognizing the extraordinary resilience of those who survived. A bronze plaque bears the names of the 3 who perished, alongside a simple quote attributed to Teresa Blackwell: "In our darkest moments on the highway, we are never truly alone." For truckers who still traverse the I-5 corridor through California's fire-prone regions, the lessons of Cedar Pass have become part of the collective wisdom passed from veteran drivers to newcomers. Chief among them is Blackwell's calm directive during the height of the crisis: stay in your vehicle, protect your air, help who you can. The true horror of the Cedar Pass. Fire entrapment lies not in the death toll, which could have been far higher without the quick thinking of drivers like Blackwell, but in the realization that climate change is creating conditions where such incidents are increasingly likely. Each summer since 2018 has brought new wildfire records to the western United States, and the phenomenon of rapid-moving fires trapping travelers has occurred in various locations, from Oregon to Colorado. For American truckers, particularly those whose routes take them through the fire-prone regions of the West, the Cedar Pass incident serves as both a cautionary tale and a testament to the difference that one prepared, level-headed driver can make when natural forces transform familiar highways into corridors of fire. Marcus Delaney had been driving hazardous materials for 8 years, and in that time, he'd handled everything from industrial chemicals to medical waste. At 42, he had earned a reputation as one of the most reliable hazmat drivers at transcontinental shipping, with a spotless safety record and perfect compliance history. His specialized training combined with a methodical attention to detail, made him the company's first choice for sensitive or high-value cargo. It was this reputation that led to his assignment on October 12, 2016, a transport that would test every protocol he'd ever learned and expose a terrifying reality about America's hazardous materials transportation system. The early autumn night was unusually cold as Delaney arrived at the Nordine Chemical Research Facility outside of Boise, Idaho. The facility was unmarked, except for a Department of Energy identification number, one of dozens of privately contracted laboratories developing industrial compounds for government applications. Security was tight. Delaney surrendered his phone before being escorted to the loading dock by armed guards. This shipment is classified Level 4 containment, the facility's shipping coordinator told him, sliding a digital tablet across the desk for his signature. Destination is the DHMS facility in Missoula. You'll be taking Northern Route 375. It's been cleared of all construction and the Highway Patrol has been notified to expect you. Level 4 was rare, the highest security and containment protocol for non-nuclear materials. In 8 years of hazmat driving, Delaney had handled exactly 2 Level 4 shipments. Both had involved military-grade chemical agents being transported to secure government facilities. Both had included an armed escort. I don't see any escort assignment in the manifest, Delaney noted, scanning the digital documents. Budget cuts, the coordinator replied with a shrug. They're monitoring via satellite. You've got the secure comms unit, right? Delaney nodded. The specialized communication device installed in his cab allowed for constant contact with both his dispatcher and federal monitoring systems, regardless of cellular coverage. Standard for Level 4 transports. What wasn't standard was the size of the cargo, a single specialized containment cylinder, barely 4 feet tall and 2 feet in diameter, secured to a specially designed pallet. Most Level 4 shipments filled an entire trailer. What exactly am I carrying? Delaney asked, knowing the answer before the coordinator gave it. That's need to know, and according to this paperwork, you don't need to know, the man replied, tapping the manifest. What you do need to know is that if containment is breached, the emergency protocol is immediate evacuation to a minimum safe distance of 5 miles upwind. There's a specialized containment kit in the storage compartment of your cab. Use it only as a last resort. It's essentially a heavily reinforced body bag for the cylinder. Delaney had transported enough dangerous materials to recognize the implications of a 5-mile evacuation zone. Whatever was in that cylinder was extraordinarily toxic, likely airborne, and almost certainly lethal. By 10:30 p.m., the cylinder was secured in Delaney's specially equipped trailer. The manifest was signed, and he was heading north on Route 375, a stretch of highway that wound through some of Idaho's most isolated mountain terrain. The route would take approximately 6 hours in ideal conditions. The weather forecast had predicted light snow after midnight, but nothing that should impede his progress. At 11:47 p.m., Delaney made his first scheduled check-in via the secure comm system. Checkpoint Alpha reached. All systems normal. Cargo secure. Current position is mile marker 47 on Route 375 north. Estimated arrival at Checkpoint Bravo in 55 minutes. The response came immediately. Acknowledged, Transport 87. Satellite monitoring confirms your position. Be advised, weather pattern has intensified. Snow accumulation may reach 4 inches by 0200 hours. Delaney wasn't concerned. His truck was equipped with specialized tires and weight distribution systems designed for adverse conditions. 4 inches of snow was well within his operational parameters. What neither Delaney nor his monitoring team could have anticipated was the catastrophic failure of a crucial component in his truck's electrical system, specifically the specialized alternator designed to power both the engine and the separate cooling system required for certain types of hazardous materials. At 12:23 a.m., as Delaney navigated a particularly isolated stretch of highway between ridge lines, his dashboard lit up with warning indicators. The primary electrical system was failing. Within seconds, the secondary backup engaged, but the strain on the system was evident as the dashboard flickered. Following protocol, Delaney immediately radioed in the situation. Transport 87 reporting electrical system malfunction. Primary system down, secondary engaging but showing strain. Requesting immediate technical support and possible escort. The response came through with noticeable static. The backup system wasn't providing full power to the communications array. Transport 87. Satellite confirms electrical anomalies. Nearest technical support is approximately 90 minutes from your position. Rerouting highway patrol unit to your location. Estimated arrival 45 minutes. Your priority is cargo integrity. If necessary, initiate stationary protocol. Stationary protocol meant pulling over, engaging manual locks on the cargo containment systems, and waiting for assistance. It was standard procedure for mechanical failures, but that procedure assumed functioning environmental controls within the trailer. Before Delaney could respond, the backup electrical system failed completely. The truck's engine died, leaving him coasting on a darkened stretch of highway with only emergency battery power for essential systems. The specialized cooling unit for the trailer, which required continuous power, would function on backup batteries for approximately 30 minutes before failing. In the sudden silence of the dead engine, Delaney could hear something he hadn't noticed before, a faint but distinct hissing sound coming from the trailer. Every hazmat driver knows that unexpected noises from containment areas represent worst-case scenarios. Delaney immediately engaged the emergency brake, bringing the truck to a controlled stop on the shoulder. Using his flashlight, he exited the cab and moved cautiously toward the trailer. The hissing was louder now, clearly emanating from the sealed containment area. Following protocol, Delaney didn't immediately open the trailer. Instead, he accessed the external monitoring panel, a small digital display that showed conditions inside, powered by its own independent battery. The reading made his blood run cold. Internal temperature, 57 degrees F and rising. Normal operating range for this cargo was between 35 to 40 degrees. More alarming was the atmospheric sensor, which showed trace amounts of an unidentified compound in the trailer's air. The containment was failing. Delaney had approximately 20 minutes before the cooling system failed completely. The rising temperature inside was already compromising the specialized cylinder's integrity. He had three options: attempt to repair the electrical system and restore power to the cooling unit, deploy the emergency containment kit to encase the cylinder and hope it held until help arrived, or execute the most extreme protocol: intentional isolation. Intentional isolation was a procedure Delaney had only read about in training manuals. It involved moving the hazardous material as far from population centers as possible, securing it, and then evacuating, essentially sacrificing the cargo, but ensuring no collateral exposure. Given his location deep in the mountains, with the nearest town over 30 miles away, Delaney made his decision. He would attempt to use the emergency containment kit, and if that failed, he would implement intentional isolation. The emergency containment kit was stored in a reinforced case behind the driver's seat. As Delaney retrieved it, the secure comm unit crackled to life, operating on its independent power source. Transport 87, be advised, we're detecting containment anomalies via satellite thermal imaging. Highway Patrol ETA, now 38 minutes. Hazmat response team has been scrambled from Missoula, ETA 3 hours. Confirm your situation. Delaney's response was concise. Implementing emergency containment procedures. Cooling system failure imminent. Breach is likely within 15 minutes. Request immediate airspace restriction and evacuation order for 5-mile radius. The gravity of his words was not lost on the monitoring team. Their response was immediate. Understood, Transport 87. Emergency protocols activated. Satellite uplink will remain active. We've lost telemetry on the cargo sensors. You are now our only eyes on site. With the specialized containment bag in hand, Delaney approached the trailer. The standard procedure required him to open the sealed doors, deploy the bag over the cylinder, and seal it manually, a process that would inevitably expose him to whatever was leaking from the container. The hazmat suit in his emergency kit would provide limited protection, but level 4 materials often required specialized containment beyond standard protective gear. Nevertheless, he had no choice. If the cylinder failed completely, the consequences could be catastrophic for communities downwind. As he donned the protective suit, Delaney mentally reviewed the evacuation map for Route 375. The wind was coming from the northwest, which meant any airborne release would travel southeast, directly toward the town of Pinecrest, population 1,200, approximately 32 miles away. With the suit secured and oxygen flowing from the attached tank, Delaney unlocked the trailer doors. The hissing was immediately louder. He swung the doors open, illuminating the interior with his flashlight. The cylinder sat in the center of the trailer, secured to its specialized pallet. Frost had formed along a hairline crack in its surface, a clear indication that the supercooled material inside was responding to the rising temperature. As he watched, a thin vapor escaped from the crack, dissipating in the trailer's air. Moving quickly, Delaney unfolded the emergency containment bag, essentially a heavily reinforced, chemically resistant body bag designed to contain leaking materials. The process required him to maneuver the cylinder into the bag and seal it with a specialized locking mechanism, all while avoiding direct contact with the leaking material. The procedure took 7 minutes, 7 minutes of exposure to whatever vapor was escaping the cylinder. The suit's external sensors showed no immediate atmospheric threats, but Delaney knew that many level 4 materials were undetectable with standard equipment. With the cylinder secured in the containment bag, Delaney resealed the trailer and returned to the cab. His oxygen tank showed 22 minutes of remaining supply, enough to reach safety if he moved quickly. Following intentional isolation protocol, Delaney drove the disabled truck further from the highway, using only the momentum of the slope and his remaining battery power to steer onto a fire access road. He positioned the vehicle in a clearing approximately half a mile from the main road, as far from potential civilian exposure as possible. After engaging all remaining locks and security systems, Delaney hiked back to the highway. The highway patrol found him walking along the shoulder at 1:17 a.m., approximately 3 miles from where he had left the truck. The hazmat response team reached the abandoned truck at 3:45 a.m. By then, thermal imaging showed the temperature inside the trailer had reached 112 degrees. Despite this, the emergency containment bag had held, preventing what investigators would later determine could have been catastrophic exposure to an experimental compound designed for rapid deployment in conflict zones. Marcus Delaney spent 3 days under medical observation. Though no immediate symptoms manifested, he would require monthly screenings for the next 5 years to monitor for delayed effects from potential exposure. The incident led to a congressional investigation into private transportation of experimental materials and sweeping reforms in escort requirements for Level 4 transports. Delaney's actions were credited with preventing potential civilian casualties, though the exact nature of the material he transported remains classified. He never drove hazmat again. The psychological impact of those moments in the trailer, exposed to an unknown lethal compound, proved too traumatic to overcome. He now works as a safety consultant, using his experience to train a new generation of specialized transport drivers. For those who drive America's most dangerous cargoes along isolated routes, Delaney's experience has become a case study in both the risks they face and the responsibility they bear, moving materials most people don't know exist, through places most people will never see, with consequences most people can't imagine. Curtis Hoffman never considered himself a hero. At 47, the veteran trucker from Milwaukee had spent over 2 decades hauling freight across America's Midwest, facing blizzards, ice storms, and the occasional tornado warning with the stoic pragmatism typical of career drivers. Weather was just part of the job, something to be respected, prepared for, and endured. But nothing in his 23 years on the road had prepared him for the events of January 12, 2017, a day that would test not only his survival skills, but his humanity in ways he could never have imagined. The winter of 2016 to 2017 had been relatively mild across the northern plains until mid-January, when a massive Arctic air mass descended from Canada, colliding with moisture-laden air from the Gulf. Meteorologists had been tracking the system for days, predicting significant snowfall, but nothing historic. What they failed to anticipate was the extraordinary intensity the storm would develop as it moved across the Dakotas. Hoffman was hauling agricultural equipment parts from Minneapolis to Bismarck, a route he'd driven countless times. He'd checked the forecast before departing. 8 to 12 inches of snow expected, with temperatures dropping into the single digits. Challenging conditions, but manageable for an experienced winter driver with a well-maintained rig. By 2:30 p.m., as he crossed into North Dakota on Interstate 94, conditions had begun to deteriorate. The snow, which had started as large, lazy flakes, had intensified to a driving sheet of white. Wind gusts buffeted his truck, creating swirling ground blizzards across the highway. Visibility was shrinking by the minute. Hoffman's dash camera, which would later become key evidence in the investigation, captured his growing concern. "Wind's picking up something fierce," he commented to himself. "Might need to find somewhere to wait this out soon." At 3:17 p.m., Hoffman's radio crackled with an urgent message. The North Dakota Department of Transportation was closing I-94 from the Minnesota border to Bismarck due to rapidly deteriorating conditions. All drivers were advised to exit at the next available opportunity and seek shelter. The nearest exit with services was Linwood, approximately 12 miles ahead. Hoffman calculated he could reach it within 15 minutes at reduced speed. What he couldn't know was that he was driving into what meteorologists would later classify as a rare mesoscale snowband, an intense, localized weather phenomenon that can produce snowfall rates exceeding 3 inches per hour, coupled with near hurricane force wind gusts. At 3:26 p.m., Hoffman's visibility dropped to near zero in a matter of seconds. His dashcam shows the world outside, transforming from a distinguishable highway to a featureless white void. Using the rumble strips as guidance, he reduced his speed to less than 20 mph, desperately searching for the reflective markers indicating the Linwood exit. Then came the moment that would change everything. Through the swirling snow, Hoffman's dashcam captured a flash of red, brake lights directly ahead. He applied his brakes gradually, following protocol for slippery conditions. But as he slowed, the red lights ahead seemed to vanish entirely. Seconds later, they reappeared, much closer and at an angle. A passenger vehicle had spun out and was now sideways across the right lane and shoulder. Hoffman swerved left to avoid collision, skillfully keeping his truck under control on the treacherous surface. As he passed the stranded vehicle, his side camera caught a brief image. A sedan with Michigan plates, hazard lights blinking weakly, nearly buried under drifting snow. Protocol in such situations is clear. Commercial drivers should continue to a safe location, then report stranded vehicles to authorities. Attempting roadside assistance in dangerous conditions creates additional hazards. But as Hoffman reached for his radio to report the stranded car, his attention was drawn to something his side camera had captured, something that protocol didn't account for. A child's face had appeared briefly in the sedan's rear window, illuminated by the truck's passing lights. The decision Hoffman made in the next 30 seconds would later be described by the North Dakota Highway Patrol as simultaneously against all professional procedure and the only decent human choice possible. Instead of continuing to the exit, he carefully maneuvered his truck to a stop approximately 200 feet ahead of the stranded vehicle, positioning it as a windbreak with hazard lights and emergency beacons activated. Fighting against wind that meteorological instruments would later measure at 58 mph, with a wind chill of -35 degrees, Hoffman made his way back to the sedan. Inside were Rebecca Keller, 34, and her 2 children, Emma, 7, and Jacob, 4, who had been traveling to Fargo when their car spun out nearly 40 minutes earlier. Their situation was dire. The car's fuel was running low, the heater was failing, and snow was rapidly enveloping the vehicle. Keller had called 911, but emergency services were overwhelmed with accidents throughout the region. Help, they'd been told, could be hours away, hours they might not have as temperatures continued to plummet. I knew immediately they wouldn't survive waiting for rescue, Hoffman later testified. The boy was already showing signs of hypothermia, confused and sleepy. They needed shelter immediately. Hoffman helped the family to his truck, carrying the young boy through snowdrifts that in places reached above his knees. The 200-foot journey took nearly 15 minutes in the brutal conditions. Once inside the relative safety of his cab, he cranked the heat to maximum and provided them with emergency blankets from his supply kit. But their ordeal was just beginning. By 4:00 p.m., the storm had escalated from dangerous to potentially lethal. Weather instruments at the nearest monitoring station recorded sustained winds of 62 mph, with gusts approaching 70 mph, officially hurricane force. Snowfall rates exceeded 4 inches per hour, creating drifts that were rapidly burying vehicles across the region. Hoffman attempted to reach emergency services via his CB radio and cell phone, but communications were spotty at best. He managed one brief connection with Highway Patrol, providing his location and the status of his passengers before the signal failed. The response from authorities was not encouraging. All emergency vehicles in the area were currently engaged in other rescues or accidents. Their estimated response time indeterminate. As darkness fell, the full gravity of their situation became clear. They were effectively trapped on an interstate that had become impassable in both directions. Hoffman's truck, though well stocked with fuel, had approximately 18 to 20 hours of idling capacity before requiring refueling. The temperature outside had dropped to -12 degrees before the monitoring station itself failed due to ice accumulation. The truck's dashcam continued recording through these critical hours, providing a haunting documentation of their ordeal. At 6:18 p.m., it captured Hoffman rationing food and water from his emergency supplies. By 8:40 p.m., young Jacob's condition had improved with warmth and hydration, but the truck had been completely enveloped by snow up to the bottom of the windows. Throughout the night, Hoffman maintained a strict regimen, running the engine for 30 minutes, then shutting it down for 15 to conserve fuel. while constantly monitoring the exhaust pipe to ensure it remained clear of snow to prevent carbon monoxide poisoning. A silent killer that claims lives in similar situations almost every winter. Between these critical tasks, he kept the children distracted with stories and simple games. A kindness that Rebecca Keller would later describe as the thing that kept us all from panicking completely. By dawn on January 13th, the storm had finally begun to abate, but their situation remained precarious. Snowdrifts had completely buried the lower half of the truck. The temperature inside the cab had dropped during the night, despite Hoffman's careful fuel management. All four were now wearing multiple layers of clothing, huddled together for warmth during the periods when the engine was off. At 7:42 a.m., Hoffman captured a brief cell signal, enough to send a text message with their exact GPS coordinates to emergency services. The response was sobering. Road clearing operations were underway, but the backlog of stranded vehicles and medical emergencies meant assistance could still be hours away. It was at this point that Hoffman made another critical decision. With fuel running dangerously low and temperatures inside the cab dropping to unsafe levels when the engine was off, he determined they needed to create additional insulation. Using the emergency kit's tools, he and Rebecca spent nearly an hour packing snow against the truck's doors and windows, a counterintuitive move that nevertheless employed the same principle used in igloos, using snow's natural insulating properties to trap heat inside. This improvised measure bought them precious additional hours. By carefully managing the remaining fuel, Hoffman was able to maintain survivable conditions inside the cab until 2:15 p.m. on January 13th, nearly 24 hours after he had first encountered the stranded family, when the distinctive sound of heavy equipment became audible through the howling wind. A North Dakota Department of Transportation snowplow, accompanied by emergency medical services and highway patrol, finally reached their location at 2:37 p.m. The rescuers were stunned to find all four survivors in relatively good condition, despite their extended exposure to one of the worst winter storms recorded in the region in decades. The official report would later document that throughout the affected areas, 17 people lost their lives during the blizzard of January 12-13, 2017. Most were travelers caught in vehicles without adequate supplies or protection. Rebecca Keller and her children were listed among the statistical anomalies, survivors of conditions that, by all normal metrics, should have been fatal. In the aftermath, Hoffman's employer initially issued him a formal reprimand for deviating from safety protocols by stopping to assist the stranded family rather than reporting their location and continuing to safety. The public backlash was immediate and intense. Veterans groups, trucking associations, and ordinary citizens across the Midwest rallied to his defense. Within a week, the company not only rescinded the reprimand, but established the Hoffman Winter Safety Initiative, providing enhanced emergency training and equipment for all their drivers. For Curtis Hoffman, the experience fundamentally changed his approach to life on the road. He began advocating for improved emergency protocols within the trucking industry, particularly regarding the rigid rules that sometimes place procedural compliance above humanitarian response. He also became an outspoken proponent for enhanced winter survival training for all commercial drivers operating in northern regions. The North Dakota legislature, responding to the events of January 2017, passed what became known as the Hoffman Act, which provided liability protection for commercial drivers who stopped to render emergency assistance during declared weather emergencies, effectively removing the professional risk of choosing humanity over protocol. Today, a small plaque at the North Dakota Highway Patrol headquarters in Bismarck commemorates the incident, bearing a quote from Hoffman that has become something of a mantra for winter drivers across the northern plains. In the worst conditions, the only resource that matters is each other. For truckers who still traverse Interstate 94 through the winter months, the story of Curtis Hoffman and the Keller family serves as both a warning and an inspiration. A reminder that sometimes the difference between tragedy and survival comes down to one person's willingness to stop when every professional instinct says to keep moving. Rebecca Keller, who now volunteers with winter preparedness programs throughout the Midwest, perhaps summarized it best in her testimony before the state legislature. There are two types of heroes: those who run toward danger and those who simply refuse to drive away from it. Curtis was the second kind, and that made all the difference. Nathan Reed had been driving the treacherous curves of Colorado's Independence Pass for nearly 15 years. At 49, the veteran trucker knew every switchback, every gradient, and every potential hazard along the narrow mountain route that connected the mining operations of the western slope with distribution centers in Denver. What he couldn't have known on the morning of June 7, 2010, was that his intimate knowledge of this perilous road would be tested like never before, and would ultimately save not only his life, but the lives of dozens of unsuspecting travelers. The day began routinely enough. Reed departed from the Silverton Mining Supply Depot at 5:15 a.m., his 18-wheeler loaded with industrial equipment, bound for Denver. The early departure was strategic. It allowed him to navigate the most dangerous sections of Independence Pass before tourist traffic picked up in the late morning. The weather forecast was ideal: clear skies, light winds, and temperatures in the mid-60s, perfect conditions for the challenging drive. By 7:30 a.m., Reed had reached the western approach to the pass. As he began the series of sharp switchbacks that would take him up to the 12,095-foot summit, he noticed something unusual through his windshield: a commercial pickup truck parked at a maintenance pullout just ahead, its hazard lights flashing. Two men in what appeared to be Colorado Department of Transportation uniforms were placing traffic cones around a small section of the guardrail. Nothing particularly alarming. Routine maintenance was common during the summer months. Reed slowed his rig, giving the workers a wide berth as he passed. Something about the scene nagged at his subconscious, however. He couldn't place it immediately, but something felt off. 10 minutes later, as he navigated a particularly sharp curve known locally as Widow's Turn, it hit him. The pickup had lacked the standard CDOT markings and identification numbers required for all official vehicles. It was such a small detail that most drivers would never have noticed. But Reed, who encountered legitimate CDOT crews regularly on his route, had developed an eye for these specifics. He reached for his CB radio, intending to contact the State Patrol dispatch to verify if maintenance was scheduled. Before he could make the call, his truck's engine warning light flashed on, accompanied by a sudden loss of power. This immediate mechanical failure, coming just minutes after passing the suspicious maintenance crew, elevated his concern to alarm. Reed carefully maneuvered the struggling truck into a scenic overlook pullout, applied the emergency brakes, and popped the hood to investigate. What he discovered sent a chill through him, despite the warm morning sun. The main fuel line had been cleanly cut and then loosely reattached, a sabotage designed to allow the truck to run normally for several minutes before the pressure caused the compromised connection to fail. Had this happened just 2 minutes later, he would have been navigating Shepherd's Cliff, a section with no shoulder and a 1,500-foot drop. Reed's dash cam, which he had installed after a near miss with a tourist 3 years earlier, had been recording continuously. He quickly reviewed the footage from his stop at the maintenance pullout. The camera had captured clear images of both men, though their faces were partially obscured by caps and sunglasses. More importantly, it had recorded the license plate of their pickup. When Reed attempted to call State Patrol on his cell phone, he discovered there was no signal, not unusual in the remote mountain pass. His truck's satellite communication system, however, was still functional. He sent an emergency alert to his dispatcher with his location and a brief description of the situation. The response came almost immediately. No scheduled CDOT maintenance on Independence Pass today. State Patrol notified. Stay put. Do not approach anyone who stops. Reed had just acknowledged the message when he noticed a sedan slow as it passed his truck. The driver, a man in his 30s wearing sunglasses and a baseball cap, seemed to be studying the disabled rig with unusual interest. The vehicle continued around the next curve, but Reed's instincts told him the encounter wasn't over. He was right. 5 minutes later, the same sedan reappeared, this time from the opposite direction, having apparently turned around. It pulled into the overlook about 50 feet from Reed's truck. Two men emerged, the same individuals Reed had seen setting up maintenance cones earlier. Neither was wearing CDOT uniforms now. Reed locked himself in the cab and positioned himself to record with his phone. Through his side mirror, he observed the men approaching, trying to appear casual, as if offering assistance to a stranded trucker. One carried what looked like a tire iron, partially concealed against his leg. "Hey buddy, need some help?" the taller man called out, his voice friendly, but his posture tense. "Looks like you're having engine trouble." Reed didn't respond. Instead, he activated his truck's external air horn, an ear-splitting blast that echoed across the mountainside. Both men flinched, momentarily startled. When Reed immediately followed with a second blast, they exchanged glances, clearly recognizing that their target was aware of the danger. What happened next would later be described in court documents as a coordinated criminal effort that came dangerously close to succeeding. Rather than retreating, the men split up, one circling toward the passenger side of the truck, while the other maintained his position, now openly brandishing the tire iron. "Open the door, trucker," the man called out, all pretense of assistance gone from his voice. "We just want the shipment. Cooperate and you'll walk away." What the would-be hijackers couldn't know was that Reed had participated in secure transport training during his military service decades earlier. He understood that his high-ground position in the elevated cab gave him a tactical advantage. He also knew his satellite communication had already alerted authorities. Help was coming, but in the remote pass, it could be 30 minutes or more before it arrived. Reed decided to create a standoff scenario, periodically sounding the air horn, both to maintain the men's anxiety level and potentially alert any passing motorists to trouble. The strategy worked initially, keeping the hijackers at a cautious distance as they attempted to determine their next move. The situation escalated when the taller assailant produced what appeared to be a handgun from his waistband. Through the closed windows, Reed heard him shout, "Last chance! Open the door or we're breaking in!" Reed had one last defensive option, one that required perfect timing and carried its own risks. Modern semi-trucks are equipped with pneumatic systems that control various functions, including the emergency brake release. By manipulating specific controls in sequence, he could create a sudden, powerful release of compressed air from the undercarriage, a blast strong enough to disorient anyone standing nearby. As the armed man approached the driver's side door, Reed executed the sequence. The resulting explosion of air, accompanied by the mechanical grinding of the brake system, erupted directly beneath the would-be hijacker. The man stumbled backward, momentarily disoriented, dropping the weapon as he fought to maintain his balance. In that crucial moment, fate intervened in the form of a Colorado State Patrol vehicle rounding the curve into the overlook. The officer, responding to an unrelated call further up the pass, hadn't yet received the alert about Reed's situation. But the scene before him, two men in civilian clothes confronting a stopped semi-truck, one clearly retrieving a dropped object from the ground, triggered his training. The patrol car's lights activated as the officer used his vehicle's PA system to order the men to step away from the truck with their hands visible. Instead, they made a dash for their sedan. The officer managed to block their vehicle's exit from the overlook just as the first of several responding units arrived from the opposite direction. The subsequent investigation revealed a disturbing pattern that sent shockwaves through the commercial trucking industry. The two men, identified as brothers Liam and Connor Markham, were connected to at least 7 other incidents across Colorado, Wyoming, and Utah, where commercial trucks had experienced mysterious mechanical failures in remote locations. In 2 of those cases, the drivers had disappeared entirely, their vehicles found abandoned. A search of the Markham's property uncovered driver's licenses belonging to the missing truckers, along with cargo manifests and shipping schedules for dozens of high-value deliveries. Most disturbing were the detailed maps of remote sections of mountain highways, with specific curves and pullouts marked for what investigators believed were planned ambush points. For Nathan Reed, the most chilling revelation came during the Markham's eventual trial. Forensic analysis of GPS data from their vehicle showed they had followed his truck from the supply depot that morning. They had specifically targeted him and his cargo. Had they succeeded with their sabotage, his truck would have lost power and braking capability while navigating one of the deadliest sections of the pass. The catastrophic potential extended beyond Reed himself. A runaway semi on Independence Pass, during the increasing tourist traffic of mid-morning, could have resulted in multiple collisions and countless casualties as the out-of-control truck careened down the mountainside. The case prompted a federal investigation into cargo theft and trafficking operations throughout the Mountain West. Subsequent arrests connected the Markham brothers to a sophisticated network that had been operating undetected for nearly 3 years, specifically targeting trucks carrying high-value industrial equipment that could be quickly resold through international black market channels. For the trucking industry, the Independence Pass incident became a watershed moment. Companies implemented new security protocols, including real-time tracking, emergency alert systems, and regular mechanical inspections at secure facilities rather than roadside. Many carriers began using escort vehicles for high-value shipments through remote areas, and dash cams, once considered optional equipment, became standard issue. Nathan Reed received commendations from both state law enforcement and the Commercial Vehicle Safety Alliance for his actions. His quick thinking and calm response under threat were credited with not only saving his own life, but potentially those of dozens of unsuspecting tourists who would have been on the pass later that morning. Reed still drives the mountain routes of Colorado, though he now leads training sessions for other drivers on security awareness and emergency response. When asked about that June morning on Independence Pass, his response reflects the vigilance that has become second nature to drivers throughout the region. The mountains will always have natural dangers, steep grades, narrow roads, rock slides. Those you can prepare for. It's the dangers you don't expect, the ones that look ordinary until suddenly they're not, that you really have to watch for. Sometimes the most important skill isn't how you handle the truck. It's noticing what doesn't quite fit in the world around you. For truckers traversing the remote highways of the American West, Reed's experience has become a cautionary tale taught in training programs throughout the industry. The lesson is clear. In the isolated stretches where cell service disappears, and help is hours away. Survival sometimes depends on spotting the small inconsistencies that signal danger. The unmarked service vehicle, the too helpful stranger, the mechanical failure that occurs at precisely the worst possible location. Today, a small, unofficial memorial stands at the overlook where Reed's quick thinking averted disaster. Fellow truckers who know the story often stop briefly, leaving a coin or small token on a weather-worn rock cairn. It serves as a silent reminder that on America's most beautiful and treacherous roads, the difference between a routine drive and a deadly encounter can hinge on a single, crucial moment of awareness.